All right, everybody, welcome back to the A to Z Poll podcast. My name is Zachary Siegel, and I'll be your host today. If you like this kind of content, if you like college football, if you like hearing all about it and staying informed, I suggest you go like and subscribe down in the comments and write a comment down below. Uh, Thank you for being here, and let's get into it. All right, so this week, another fun week of college football. I will say a lot less upsets than we're used to, but that might just be because we've had a ton of upsets so far this season. But without further ado, let's rock and roll. So, number one, staying at number one this week, we're gonna stick with the Oregon Ducks. Again, like I said last week, this felt like it could have been a trap game, if not just a difficult game. And Oregon not only beat them, but they covered the 22, I believe. So Illinois, they stuck with it with Penn State. They kind of stuck with it at the beginning of this Oregon game, but it seems like Oregon has kind of taken that next step into being an upper echelon of teams. Speaking of that next step to the upper echelon, a team that did not have a game this week, but that would be the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia had themselves a well-deserved off week after handing the Longhorns their first loss of the season. And frankly, with Florida on the horizon, I don't care how bad Florida's been this year. It's a rivalry game. Georgia has lost to Florida in the last few years, and it would not surprise me with all the chaos that's happened this year if we saw something similar to that happen again. I do think Georgia is also in that upper echelon of really, really good, and obviously they've lost this year, but borderline unbeatable teams at this point. But again, anything can happen this year. Number three, Penn State Nittany Lions. This was absolutely a trap game. The week before, they have to go and host. They have to go play host to Ohio State. They come face to face with Wisconsin, which they handled pretty well, 28-13. Now, I've been saying this for a couple weeks now. I think that if you were to look at Penn State and how they're playing this year from the untrained eye, it looks almost like they haven't been playing as well, right? You would expect them to do something to, this team that they just haven't been able to do, right? We saw them blow out teams last year. We've seen them in blowing out teams, but just not blowing out any good teams. This year, they're kind of having a much more methodical, consistent approach to football. And as long as Drew Aller can stay healthy through this Ohio State game, I think they actually match up very well with the Buckeyes this year. Even with, like I said, them scoring a little bit of less points or a little bit less points per game, I think that just the methods that they're using, they're not, relying on those like super big plays and super explosive plays, although that is absolutely within their repertoire, which they have shown this year, especially under, and I feel like I mention him every week, but Andy Kotelnicki, that guy's going to be a head coach somewhere next year. That being said, we'll talk about the Penn State Ohio State game in just a second. Number four, Miami. Miami beat Florida State 36-14. They continue to win in different ways. So this week I thought was an especially interesting situation, right? If you didn't realize they're a new top five team, or at least new to this most recent iteration of the top five. They've been up there before for me, but now I have them both over both Ohio State and Texas. And I think that was because of how they won this game. Now, Florida State has proven that they are not a very good team. They definitely have talent, but whether it's coaching, whether it's commitment to the cause, whatever it might be, we have found out that Florida State is just not that good of a football team this year. Now, Miami still had some trouble passing the ball, which is something they have not had trouble doing at all. Coming into this week, they led the country in yards per game and points per game. But they were able to win this game on the ground. Damian Martinez had himself a career day, along with some of the other running backs. And Cam Ward threw for a lot of yards, but just couldn't find his way in the end zone. And Florida State somehow figured out a way to make them win in different ways, and they did it. So this level of versatility and this level of resilience from this Miami team is just a great example to me of why I think they're part of this, tier one level of school. Number five, Ohio State. Ooh, they barely eked one out against Nebraska. A Nebraska team that got utterly embarrassed the week before against Indiana. Ohio State scares me. Coming into this year, this season, I was, very, very confident that they were the team to be, that they were going to go, do their whole undefeated thing, win a national title. And if they didn't do that, it was a fail of a season. And although Ohio State is not, by any means out of this season, one play doesn't go their way last week, and they are much closer to not making the playoff. It was a trap game. I'll give them that. But Ohio State and Will Howard have to come in with everything firing. If there's one thing I know about Ohio State football, that there are two truths. Truth number one is that Ohio State doesn't lose to Penn State. But truth number two is that they are 1-5 against top five organization, or at least Ryan Day is in his tenure. So you're looking at a program coming into a hostile environment. Granted, probably not as hostile as Oregon was, but a hostile environment against a team that you guys probably were thinking at the beginning of the year was going to be a cakewalk. And now you're the underdog. You're going on the road, and you have to face and you have to do something that your head coach historically has not done very well. Not to mention, Ohio State's biggest problem this year has been the deep playability. And while I was just talking about Penn State doesn't have to rely on it, with Andy Kotelnicki's style of offense, he takes a shot every several plays. Big plays will happen if they allow them to. Ohio State absolutely is pound for pound one of the most talented, if not the most talented teams in college football, but they have an uphill battle at this point to beat Penn State. Number 6, speaking of pound for pound, one of the best teams, the Texas Longhorns. This is just also a very talented roster, which I've talked about for years. But I mean, for weeks now, but they barely escaped Vanderbilt. I'm not really sure what's happening right now, and I kind of love what's happening in college football. But Coach Sark needs to use this time this week as effectively as possible in order to just get down to the fundamentals, right? They beat Vanderbilt 27-24, which, look, they won. They got out of it on the final score sheet. It's not going to it's going to be they're 7-1. It's not 6-2, right? They could have won by 1 point. And it's still they're still walking away with the win. But this is not a win that makes me feel good. Maybe Vanderbilt's just better than we all think they are. And they were top 25 last week. Spoiler, they're not there this week because they now have 3 losses. But Texas needs to fix the fundamental problems in their play. Like, it's as simple as that. Steve Sarkisian is one of the most creative game planning coaches that maybe we've ever seen, at least, top 5 in the last 50 years. His ability to just absolutely befuddle defensive coordinators and create game plans that are unrecognizable from what they did the week before is beyond impressive. But it feels like they've gotten away from the initial, like they've gotten away from the fundamentals, right? You're watching players just miss open routes, and you're watching Quinn Ewers struggle out there. If you're going to be creative, step one is to get the basics down. I mean, I just don't understand how you're going to go out there and not have some sort of game plan with just some basic plays in it. I mean, I don't know, but Texas needs to use this off week as a regroup and figure out who they are kind of week. The team that just came off of a bye week, and another one of the highest powered offenses in college football, that's gonna be Clemson. Posted on TikTok last week that I thought they were one of the best teams, and 4th in total yards, 4th in total points, 10th in yards per play. And that's including a Georgia game where they put up 3 points and had a crazy, terrible game, right? Dabo Swinney has done, what great coaches do, and he's built this team up from the ground. This team did not come in a finished project, and they're still not a finished product. We're just over halfway through the season, and there's still a lot more growing that can happen. And if Clemson grows enough, they're going to be, one of the best teams in the country if they aren't already. If they can fix some stuff on the defensive side of the ball, they're going to be a very, very scary team. And they would be easily number 1 in all of these stats if you just forewent the Georgia game. Number 8, Iowa State. And I feel like I say a lot of stuff about Iowa State. I feel like, well, they didn't have a game this week, but I feel like I always talk about how they don't have a tough schedule. And while that's true, the manner in which they're beating teams is really fascinates me. They don't make mistakes. They are last in FBS and penalties, and they simply perform. They simply execute. Each player wins each battle, most plays, which is more than a lot of teams can say, right? Getting a group of 150 18 to 20-year-olds, 18 to 22-year-olds to perform at a high level every play is a crazy feat. And, hats off to Matt Campbell for being able to do that. But I mean, Iowa State feels like they can beat any team just because of their, the way that they produce plays on a down to down basis. Speaking of a team that seems to be just perfect almost is Indiana. They beat Washington 31-17 this week, and even with a backup quarterback, Kurt Cignetti is still leading his squad to a win, and basically doubling his opponent's score win. Right? He didn't just eke by this Washington team, a Washington team that beat Michigan not that long ago, and a Michigan team that won the national championship last year. So Indiana seems like they're a very for real team, and absolutely has cemented themselves, in my opinion, assuming they don't have a crazy downfall at the end of the year, as one of the better teams and a playoff team this season. Number 10, rounding out the top 10, we have the Texas A&M Aggies, a team that I wrote off pretty early on. I didn't think that Notre Dame was that great of a team to start. If we remember, I didn't have in my initial top 10, and then they went into Texas State and into Texas College Station. Sorry, they went into College Station and beat the Aggies at home. From there, I pretty much wrote them off. Then on the flip side, you had LSU, who I wrote off, and then they kind of made their way back, and we had finally a heavyweight SEC matchup of teams that have fought their way back from the depths of hell to duke it out. And Texas A&M, under new head coach Mike Elko, doing what good coaches do with a basically backup quarterback, Marcel Reed, towards the end, proceeded to whoop LSU, for lack of a better term. They beat them 38-23. It wasn't that close. And even with a slow start to the game, this team felt very poised, felt very in control the entire time, which is a very, very tough thing to do, especially in college, especially in tough environments. Number 11, the Tennessee Volunteers. They only dropped this week because they didn't have a game, and they were just teams that impressed me a lot this week. But the Vols had this week off before their rivalry week with Kentucky. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. Kentucky almost beat Georgia. This is not a pushover game. I don't think Kentucky's a very good team, but Tennessee lost to Arkansas. Tennessee is obviously a beatable game. Kentucky is a team that has proven they can beat good teams. I think, especially in a rivalry setting, this is going to be a very, very good game, and absolutely on my list of what to watch. The season has really been a roller coaster, and it seems like Nico Iamaleava is really trending in the right direction with as far as his development, as far as everyone is concerned. I just hope that he can continue with this development and they can continue to roll past Kentucky for the sake of Tennessee football. Number 12, BYU. 37-24 victory over University of Central Florida. They're another team that is winning because they're executing, right? Out there with their quarterback Jake Ratliff, or as he likes to call himself, BYU. He's throwing it for a ton of yards, and everyone has been contributing on both sides of the ball. And again, like I said, I've been saying this about BYU for a while, but they win every rep. They are a team that plays with an intensity and a deliberacy almost that a lot of teams aren't able to play with. Number 13, Notre Dame. Makes me sad, but Navy got whooped this week, 51-14. This is a Notre Dame team that I expected to see after the Texas A&M beating, right? I didn't think Texas A&M or Notre Dame were super amazing in the beginning of the year, but I figured Notre Dame won in a hostile environment with a new quarterback, and still a relatively young roster. Um, and I thought that, and then after they lost to Northern Illinois, I was like, okay, well, that season's probably over. They probably don't have much of a chance unless they, start blowing out some good teams. And Navy is a good team. They could still find themselves, in a playoff spot. It's not really in their control anymore, but they're number 2 in the AAC and will absolutely play Army in the AAC championship if they both make it there, right? And at that point, who knows what'll happen? You can see, spoiler alert, number 14, Boise State next. They could lose something. They almost lost this last week. So a couple losses from some teams, and Navy's right back in the mix for the number 12 spot of the playoffs. That being said, we're not here to talk about Navy because they got blown out. We're here to talk about Notre Dame. Notre Dame beat a good Navy team. They beat the brakes off of them. This was a very, very impressive game for the Fighting Irish, and it's kind of cool to see it finally come together. It feels like it hasn't really gelled as well as we thought this year, and now it's kind of just working. I don't really know how to explain it. This is a team, and who knows? Maybe they could, it could all be for not next week if they lose another game. But this is exactly the kind of win that the Irish need in order to fight their way back into a playoff spot. Number 14, my leading group of 5 team, still has been for a while, is going to be the Boise State Broncos. 29-24 victory over UNLV. Ashton Jeanty did not have the numbers that he normally does. I think, only had 120 something yards only off of 35 carries, but he showed up in big spots. Not to mention that UNLV loaded the box the entire time, and Maddox Medicine even struggled a little bit and so did the receivers, as far as, Cam Camper did not have that great of a week. And for them to still be able to come out on top and put up nearly 30 points with Ashton Jeanty having one of his worst games, which still sported a few touchdowns and over 100 yards, is a very, very impressive and resilient thing for this Boise State team to do. And look, like I said, they came close to losing, but it never really felt like they didn't have control. Number 15, up a couple spots after this whooping, but Alabama, they won 34 to nothing over Mizzou. What a beatdown. This never felt close. It honestly should have been more, I think. Alabama just, this is what they should be doing against lesser teams. And, like, not that Mizzou is necessarily a pushover, in my opinion, but they're just not. I mean, I've said this, we'll talk about Mizzou later, but they're just not in that upper echelon of SEC teams. They're not really in that secondary echelon of SEC teams where, like, Bama is. They have a lot of really talented top end players, but Brady Cook's been playing terribly, and Luther Burden has just not been gotten the ball. So at this point, Alabama should have done this to this team. Jalen Miller finally looked good. The offensive line finally looked good. And it feels like it finally came together for the first time in a few weeks. Number 16, the Pitt Panthers, one of our last couple undefeated teams, absolutely demolished Syracuse, 41 to 13. Kyle McCord got reminded why he couldn't hack it at Ohio State, because he threw 3 pick sixes within the first 10 minutes of the game. I turned it on. I was like, I actually said, literally minutes after I posted the episode last week, I said, "Hey, I'm gonna go watch the Pitt Syracuse game." I was like, it should be a good game. Syracuse is one of the better teams that they face this year. They embarrassed them. The scary thing is about Pitt is they got Eli Holstein he's only a redshirt freshman. So unless some SEC team throws him a ton of money, Pitt should probably be good for a couple years. And their defense, I mean, like I said, the offense, I was just talking about Eli Holstein, but their offense hasn't even had to do anything last week. Their defense, like I said, had 3 pick sixes, was constantly keeping the court under pressure and barely let them move the ball. Very impressive showing by the Panthers, and still a dark horse, but becoming a much more, leading horse to make a run at the ACC. Number 17, Kansas State Wildcats, 7-1 they are right now. They won 29 to 27 against Kansas. Rivalry week brings the best of every team. Like I was saying a few spots ago, between Kentucky and Tennessee, Although I think Tennessee is a much better team than Kentucky, and I don't think Kentucky is that expressly good of a team, it's going to be a close game. The same thing with Kansas State versus Kansas. Kansas has had an atrocious season, losing to West Virginia, losing to some other team, almost lost to UNLV earlier this season. Kansas State should have walked them. I would expect Kansas State to have done some pretty nasty things to Kansas, but I think that because it's a rivalry week, I'm willing to give them kind of that leeway of look, they came out on top. It was a tough fought game. It was a difficult game and in a tough environment, but look, Kansas State is clearly a very talented team, and we got a vintage Jalen Daniels experience. We had a little bit of a cleaner game from Avery Johnson than I think we're used to, but if they can continue to play the way that they're playing right now, I it's going to be hard for them to be beat later in the season. Number 18, LSU, taking their second loss of the season, pretty embarrassingly to Texas A&M. They had the lead, pretty early on. When I saw how this game was going, I was like, oh, be over before it starts. Um, they just lost focus. Garrett Nussmeier didn't play his best game. They stopped running the ball well. You know, they didn't make the adjustments that Brian Kelly probably needed to make at halftime. This feels just indicative of the issues that I was talking about. I almost wish it happened a week sooner, so I didn't give them the props that I did last week. Look, LSU only has one conference loss. They only have two losses. Their season's not over, but again, it's just not in their hands, and they're gonna have to win some pretty impressive games later in the season and win out and hope some teams lose in order for them to actually be considered for anything real. Number 19, the Ole Miss Rebels. They beat Oklahoma 26-14. This was Jackson Dart's first 300 plus yard game in over a month. This was I expected this Ole Miss team to be better than last year. I expected it to be a high flying, high powered offense strapped with, you know, a star power defense that was going to just shut teams down. And they give up, two touchdowns to Oklahoma, who went back to Jackson Arnold and were only able to put up 26 points. This didn't feel like an elite team. This felt like a team that just doesn't have its identity. I think Ole Miss, again, similar to LSU, although they lost to LSU, I think that they have the talent, they have the ability to win out. Maybe some teams lose that need to lose and they make a playoff run, but they have a lot of stuff to. Lane Kiffin has a lot to clean up before that happens. Number 20, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs, a nail biter between Duke. This was a crazy game. I believe this was on my games to watch last week, and what an insane game. This was super fun to watch, honestly. SMU and Duke both just going back and forth. SMU made a million mistakes. Duke couldn't capitalize when they needed to. Last minute go for two ended up giving the game to Southern Methodist. Southern Methodist could be out of my top 25 right now and thought almost irrelevant if just literally feet or inches or centimeters go differently. But as of now, SMU seems like it's our best hope to keep eliminating undefeated teams when they get Pitt this week. SMU is a far cry from what they looked like in the beginning of the year when they lost to Nevada. They've benched Preston Stone, and they are becoming that team that I think people thought they would become last year, coming when they won the AAC, and people were like, oh, they're gonna they're gonna run the ACC next year. They could really give them teams a run for their money, and then they got curb stomped by Boston College in the bowl game. This is now the team that is getting better and better each week in and week out, and I think that it's going to be a really good game. Hey, they're on my list again for this upcoming week. They got Pitt coming up, and if they and this is going to be one of the games that I'm suggesting on my games of the week to watch. Number 21, no longer sharing, no longer a number buddy with Navy, the Army Black Knights. They now hold the torch of military academy football success all by their lonesome. They get to play Air Force this week, and I don't know if you guys saw, you can see from the street somebody snuck into Air Force's stadium, and in the two spots in front, right? You got the stadium and it says Air Force, and right here they wrote a C and an H and wrote Chair Force. I thought that was fun, right? It's being really chippy. Again, it's another game that is like a pseudo rivalry game. Navy already beat Air Force earlier this year. So if Army struggles against Air Force, maybe that gives us our true answer and a little preview to the Army Navy game of who's actually better. That being said, I expect Army to win this game. And again, I'm almost rooting for a military academy to do something this year. That would just be really fun. Number 22, Washington State, 29-26 victory over San Diego State. Not really a bad team. Um, and looking at it, I didn't even realize they only have one loss to number 14, Boise State. It's not like they got blown out by some teams. They beat Washington in the Apple Cup earlier this year in Seattle. It wasn't in Washington Stadium, but it was still in Seattle. And John Mateer has been playing really, really good. Uh, he's been playing really well. Um, but on top of that, they're quietly making themselves, on top of West Coast football again. So South West Coast football, West Coast football is pretty unanimously run by Oregon right now, but they are keeping themselves very, very relevant and only have one loss. I mean, I'm pretty sure they have to, but they're going to win the Pac-2, which doesn't really mean a whole lot. But this is still a program that is fighting for its life right now, like many other programs who have been affected by conference realignment, and it's cool to see them actually succeeding through this adversity. Number 23, the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. Actually, by the time I'm recording this, they have already beaten uh, Kennesaw State, but we're going to talk about their game against Sam Houston State. They beat them 31-14. And they just continue their classic air raid style of offense that with Cade Velkamp that is just good, right? They have two losses, but their losses are to Alabama and Boston College, a Boston College team that still had Thomas Castellanos and was still very, very good in the beginning of the season before Kai Robichaux decided to stop playing well. Before they, the Boston College found their struggles. Western Kentucky played them very close and barely lost that game. They're right now should be at the top of Conference USA if they're not already. And I mean, especially with a Liberty loss, they're undefeated in conference play, and they are proving to be one of the best and hardest to defend teams. Not to mention Hayden Velkamp, obviously a classic pocket passing style quarterback, has proven he has some ability to move. Number 24, finding themselves back on this list is going to be Colorado. They beat Cincinnati 34-23. It seems like this happens a lot, right? Colorado goes and plays a bad team or a less than great team, and they get they get sent to they send that team to the Shadow Realm and destroy them. Then they go and play a good team and they get destroyed because of their offensive line or their defense or something, right? So they have found themselves on and off this list for a while, but they're 6-2. Again, they have two of the best players in college football. They should be a good team. And it's just interesting to see, them not necessarily always be a good team, but we'll see what happens next year if Deion decides to stay and what kind of players he can bring in. Finally, round out this list, I was really unsure who I wanted to put here. I actually went back and forth between Missouri and Navy and Iowa and even Western Michigan a little bit. Even Illinois was in this conversation just because, all these teams have some positives about them, but I'm going to give Missouri the preseason top 10 team the benefit of the doubt for now. They got blown out by Alabama. That is true. They lost 34-0. But I believe their ceiling is still better than how most of the other teams right outside of this top 25 are playing. They are definitely not in the top tier of the SEC. They're probably in like the third or fourth tier at the moment. But with players like Luther Burden, with a defense like they sometimes have, depending on what day of the week it is, it's just going to be hard. It's hard not to be able to convince myself to put them in. My honorable mentions are Iowa, Navy, Western Michigan, Illinois, Tulane, Memphis, Virginia Tech, Vandy, TCU, Minnesota, Liberty, and Arkansas. Well, Heisman Watch, I decided to do 10 this week. Ashton Genty, Travis Hunter, Cam Moore, Dylan Gabriel. That top four has not changed. Number 5, you got Cade Klubnik. Number 6, Jalen Milroe. Number 7, Jeremiah Smith. He's going to be one of the best wide receivers, maybe ever. And I'm even willing to stake that in the NFL. Number 8, Tetairoa McMillan. Number 9, Le'Veon Moss. Sick name for a football player. And then number 10, BYU's own Jake Retzlaff. Riley, some games to watch this week. Ohio State, Penn State, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Pitt, SMU, Kentucky, Tennessee, and San Diego State, Boise State. I think that's going to also be a very, very good game. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And thanks again for watching. Go watch some football, and I hope your team wins.